Hey guys, it's Vicky, and today I'm here to share with you all the books that I read in the month of June. I had a pretty good reading month, quantity-wise, and also, in some instances, quality-wise. So let's go ahead and just dive in. Okay, so the first thing that happened in June was a DNF. Unfortunately, Bobby and I were doing a buddy read of this book, and pretty quickly about, I would say for me it was like 20 pages in, but I made it to 40 pages. And I think Bobby was about the same. We both decided this just wasn't for us, and it is We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. I just could not get into the writing of this book. I was really interested in the premise, but the writing was a little pretentious. I felt like there were a lot of things that she was talking about that I just didn't know what she was referencing. I didn't know what she was talking about. I was starting to feel pretty dumb. And also, I felt like she was just going off on tangents and not kind of sticking to the meat of the story, which was that she had this child, and when he became a teenager, he committed mass murder. And I kind of just wanted her to stay on that path, and she kind of kept venturing off, even only like 20 pages in. So yeah, this was not for me. DNF'd it, and I'm gonna be passing this book along probably to like a free little library or something. And then really quickly, I wanted to mention that I did read this month Long Bright River by Liz Moore, but I did a full review of this in my 5-star prediction follow-up video, which I will link. So if you want to check out my review on this book, it's there. I just didn't want to review it again because I just felt like that would be way too repetitive. So yeah, if you want to hear my thoughts on this one, go check out that video. But I enjoyed this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So the first book that I completed in the month of June was A Good Marriage by Kimberly McCreight. This is a thriller, kind of like law procedural in some senses also, about a lawyer who has an old college friend call her up one day because he has been arrested and he is pretty sure he's going to be charged with the murder of his wife, and asks her to be his attorney. Even though she's not a criminal defense attorney, he wants her to help him. So she reluctantly decides to, and it goes from there. So I enjoyed this story. I thought that there were definitely some intriguing aspects of the plot. Without giving too much away, I will say it has some stuff to do with sex parties. Wow, wow, wow. So that whole thing was pretty intriguing because it's not something that you read a lot about in books. It's not, So that part was interesting. But for the most part, I was a little bit underwhelmed by this, which is I know it's kind of like unpopular because I know a lot of people right now are really enjoying this book. And for me, it was just kind of like, okay. I thought that there are kind of 2 twists in this book because the way that the narrative works is it goes between Lizzie, I believe her name was Lizzie, oh my gosh, yes, who is the lawyer who is working to defend this man, her old college friend. It goes between her in the present, and then it goes to his wife's perspective, the person who's murdered, in the days leading up to her death. So it was kind of interesting because you got to know the victim, and yeah, so that was kind of cool. So there were kind of 2 twists in this, because there was a twist, obviously, like you figuring out like what happened to her. Amanda was her name. What happened to Amanda? And then there's also like a second twist. And I thought that the second twist was pretty cool. Like I didn't see it coming. It's kind of been done before, but I did still enjoy it. It still did catch me by surprise. But the main twist, like what happened to Amanda, I was extremely underwhelmed by, unfortunately. I just when everything was revealed, I was like, that's it? Really? Oh, okay. So yeah, I liked this, but it didn't wow me as far as thrillers go. It wasn't like, wow, this was so good. Which I know is an unpopular opinion because a lot of people really love this book, but It was good. I mean, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It was a 3-star read. The next book that I completed in June was a short story collection, a horror short story collection called Who's There? And it's by Demas Rio. And this book was sent to me by the author for review, so thank you to him for sending it my way. And it's 5 short stories, so it's a pretty quick read, and they are horror related. And overall, I enjoyed this book. Every story was a 3-star read. So nothing like wowed me, but nothing like, there wasn't one that I thought was like really bad, which is kind of rare for me because normally I'm kind of all over the place when I read short story collections. But this one, everything was, it was good. My favorite story was the second one, and it's called At Dusk, and it was very, very short, which is probably my main criticism of it. I wish it was longer. I wish it had been expanded upon, because it was about a kind of like a folklore sort of story about a creature that lives in the woods and attacks or steals away children. And I think the reason I liked it so much was because when I was a kid, my parents used to tell me this story that they called them Ricky Roos, and I have no idea where they got that from. I even tried to Google it to find out if it was like a common thing, and I couldn't find anything on it. But my parents, when I was a kid, I had to be in, like most kids, by the time the street lights came on, and if I wasn't in by the time it got dark, the Ricky Roos would come and get me and steal me away. Yeah, my parents were were great. And so when it would start to get dark, I'd be like running home, trying to get there before the street lights came on, and my dad would be standing at the door and he'd be like, Ricky Roo, Ricky Roo. So yeah, that was great memories for me. And so this story, At Dusk, reminded me of that. So for me, it was kind of nostalgic in that way, and I did enjoy it. I thought it was good. But like I said, I wish it had been a little bit longer. The other stories were fine. There were a few that had kind of plot points or tropes that have been used a lot. And I noticed that recurring themes tended to be about guilt and about grief. And so yeah, it overall wasn't a bad collection. I overall enjoyed it. And the way that I rate my short story collections is I rate every story and then do an average rating. So every story was a 3, so the whole collection gets a 3-star from me. So yeah, if you want to check it out, feel free to. I enjoyed it, and thank you to Demas Rio for sending it my way. And yeah, it was a 3-star read. The next book that I completed in June, I listened to on audio, and that was The Hot Zone by Richard Preston. This is a nonfiction book about an Ebola outbreak that happened in the United States in the early 90s in Virginia. And the beginning of the book kind of tells you about some of the origins of some of the strains, different strains of Ebola, and goes through what happens to the body when you have Ebola. And oh man, I had points in this when I had to kind of fast forward because it was graphically depicted. And I don't know if you guys know what Ebola does to the body, but it is nasty. It's like a horror movie. Basically, your body, it melts, it just like melts from the inside, and you bleed out and die. It's a very gross, graphic, painful, horrible death. And Ebola is contagious, very contagious. So the book goes into the first part talking about the virus, possible places of origin, and a couple of people that there were a couple strains that he talks about, and like the first cases that were found with having these strains. And then he goes into the outbreak that happened in a monkey house in Virginia and how they contained that outbreak. And so overall, this was interesting. Like I said, the first part just was wow. I had to, like I said, fast forward certain parts because it was just too graphic. It was just too graphic. And I'm just very squeamish though, and sensitive to things like blood and vomit and that kind of thing. And that's pretty much what Ebola is. Ugh. So, but then because this book was published in the mid-90s, I started to kind of want to find further reading because I know that there was an outbreak in 2014, I believe, that also made its way to the United States, and I wanted to kind of see about, you know, maybe read a more updated version of, you know, things that they have found out about Ebola and whatnot. And in my research, trying to find other things to read, he did write a book about that outbreak, but I probably won't be reading it. Sorry if you can hear like nonsense going on outside. I think my neighbors are getting their yard sprayed or something, and it's kind of loud, so I apologize for the noise. So I don't think I'll be reading his book about the 2014 outbreak, because in doing my research about finding more books about Ebola, I found a lot of reviews of this book where they said, because that's the one thing also that I should mention about this, is the writing is very like thriller-like. It's like a medical thriller. Like you feel like you're reading a movie script. It's just the way he writes it's just that way. And so it's very engrossing, and you get really like, wow, this is intense. And he obviously does that intentionally to make it more interesting. Unfortunately, he also, Richard Preston also tends to, at least in this book, they said that he didn't lie. He just sort of amplified facts to make things more interesting. And that just kind of bothered me, because to me, it's like, to me, this kind of stuff is interesting on its own. You don't need to like try to make it more interesting or to, you know, make it more compelling to sell more books, is what I kind of felt like. And because to me, the facts themselves are compelling enough that you don't need to like do that. Because when I read nonfiction, like I don't want to question whether what I'm reading is factual or not, or is being manipulated. And I felt like this was a little bit manipulated after reading some reviews. So that was a little bit disappointing, because up until that point I was like, wow, this is like really interesting. The writing is just like really grabbing me, and it's like I said, it's like reading a movie script, you know, the way that he writes, it's so like thriller-like and all of that. And then you kind of find out that some of it's been exaggerated slightly. It's just kind of disappointing. So I don't think I'll be reading any more Richard Preston for that reason. There was also something that happens at the end of the book, like the last chapter or last section, that I just really didn't see the point of. I thought it was really stupid, really irresponsible and dangerous. And I felt like, again, he put it in the book to make it more like, ooh, exciting, and again, to like sell more books. I don't know. It rubbed me the wrong way. So I would say if you're interested in Ebola, you could read this book, but go into it knowing that there are things about it that have been brought into question. I will say though, I was entertained by this book. I was interested in it. I found it interesting, and it has made me want to dive more into reading about viruses, other viruses even. And so for that, I can at least give it credit for that. But yeah, otherwise, kind of take this with a grain of salt, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. Really, dude. So next up, I read, like a lot of people, I think, in the month of June, I read White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. This is a nonfiction book about white fragility, which is this thing that happens sometimes or oftentimes with white people when confronted with race relations or talking about race. They tend to get very defensive and angry and emotional, and this book is just about, I believe was written for white people by a white woman to just make you kind of aware of your white privilege and how this system works and your role in the system. And it kind of, because I think the whole point of her book is to show you that in order to be a better ally and to help with this cause, you need to know your place, your real place. And to do that, you need to confront racism as a system and get over the idea of thinking that it's just people that, you know, mean-hearted people that hate another race, because it's so much more than that. It's a whole system that we are, you know, that we are brought into, that as white people we benefit from, and we have to acknowledge that and kind of marinate in that idea, and it's uncomfortable. Reading this book, there were times I felt uncomfortable. There were times I started to feel a little defensive. But then I had to check myself and say, no, this is what this is all about. So this was a really important book to read. I'm really glad that I read this book kind of on my journey to learning about racism in America and learning how to become a better ally. This was a great jumping off point because of what I just said, the way that it kind of addresses white people's role in the system. And so I appreciated this book very much. I did learn a lot from this book. What I will say about it though is definitely don't read White Fragility and then think your work is done, because this book, like I said, just touches on one aspect really of a much bigger picture. In this book though, it gives you a lot of great information about what white fragility is, what white privilege is. It doesn't give you a lot of history, and it doesn't really give you a lot of, it doesn't give you a lot of anecdotal information or a lot of advice on how to confront this in everyday situations. She does give a few examples, because I don't know if I mentioned it, but Robin DiAngelo she's kind of a trainer on racial relations. She goes to like workplaces and things like that and kind of does talks about this topic. And so she has a few anecdotal like examples from her time at work, things that she has seen during these training sessions. I kind of wish there had been more background, more history, and so to get that, you're definitely going to have to read other books besides this one. I can also see why some people would read this book and feel like it would make it could make things worse, because a lot of people might read this book and their white fragility comes through, they get very defensive, they're like, this book does nothing but, you know, trying to make white people feel bad and blah blah blah. And so basically like their white fragility, the thing that they're supposed to be like confronting and learning about and trying to like learn to deal with, is the very thing that makes them not like this book. So I can see where people would say that this book could cause more issues, but I personally felt like I learned a lot from it. It did feel a little bit dry at times, and like I said, I wish that there had just been a little bit more context, background. And so for that, obviously, I know I'm going to be doing a lot more reading. Like I mentioned in my July TBR, I'm reading Stamped from the Beginning right now, which is a fantastic book if you want history. Fantastic. And the history goes back hundreds of years. It's written in a very engaging way. So I would definitely recommend going, if you're going to read White Fragility, plan on reading other works as well to, you know, if you want to learn more. And I should say that she does list some other books to read, documentaries to watch, lectures to watch, and things like that to get more information. So that's nice too. So yeah, overall, this was a great read, an important read, one that I think anybody that's interested in becoming a better ally, especially white people, you need to read this book. I've been struggling with what I wanted to rate this. I keep going back between rating it a 4 and a 5, only because I got a lot out of it, but I was expecting more out of it. I don't know. So I'm still at a toss-up. I'm not sure if it's a 4 or a 5, but just know I did enjoy the read. I do recommend it to people, and if you're interested at all in it, you should definitely pick it up. The next book I completed in June was one that Leia and I have been reading since like mid-May, and we finished it this month, and that is Warriors Into the Wild by Arent Hunter. This is the first book in the Warriors series, which I understand is a very long series. There's been a lot of different kind of offshoots of this series. it's kind of overwhelming how many more books there are. We physically have the next 2 books in the series though, which I think was like the original kind of trilogy, I think. So, and yeah, we're excited to continue the series. This is a series about cats. So if you're not a cat person, you might not like this because it's all about cats and the way cats are. But it basically focuses on this kind of forest area where there are different clans of cats living. You have Thunder Clan, you have Shadow Clan, you have Wind Clan, and then you have up in the sky, you have Star Clan, which are all of the dead cats that kind of come out and communicate with certain people, certain cats in the community, and offer advice and guidance and things like that. So you kind of have that spiritual kind of aspect as well. And this book in particular though is about a cat, a house cat, or what they call a kitty pet in this series, but a house cat named Rusty who joins one of the clans. He joins Thunder Clan, and so he becomes Firepaw, becomes his new name. And it's about him adapting to this new life of being like a wild cat and the things that they have to do to survive and to protect themselves. And like I said, there's a lot of like different factions and stuff going on, and like kind of political intrigue going on within these clans, which is very interesting because you're talking about like a middle grade series about cats. But it got very like, towards the end, I was like very into like what was happening. It was, like I said, there was a lot of like political intrigue, and it was very like Shakespearean at times also in terms of like the way the plot progressed, which surprised me because at first when I was reading this, I was very unsure about it. I was like, this is just kind of silly and weird. Like, I don't know about this, but like Leia was really into it, so we kept reading it, and by the end I was totally into the story, and now I want to like keep reading it and know what happens. So yeah, this was a bit of a surprise. It was fun. It was interesting. It really was, and I am looking forward to reading the rest of the books. Now, I don't know if we're gonna go and do all the books because, like I said, it's a very long series, but we definitely want to read the next 2 and find out what happens. So yeah, if you are at all interested or have young people in your life that you think would like this, that like cats, yeah, give this a shot because it was pretty good. And I gave this one 3 stars. And the last book that I read for the month of June, I also listened to on audio, and that book was All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This is a memoir told through essays and letters to family members and friends. And it's basically about George's life from when he's a kid up through his college years. And it's about his life growing up he grew up in New Jersey and later Virginia. And it's just about him growing up as a Black gay man. And I loved this book so much. It's one of those books that when I was listening to it, which I should mention, the audiobook is also narrated by George M. Johnson. So I love that when you read a memoir and the person who wrote the book is narrating. I just love that. So, but pretty much immediately I was just totally sucked in to his story, and it turned into where I stopped listening for a day or 2 because I didn't want it to end. It was just like one of those books that I knew it was getting close to the end and I didn't want to say goodbye. So I didn't listen to it for a couple of days. And yeah, it was so good. Just the way that it was very conversational, and it's geared towards young adults, but I think it is one that everybody should read because he, like I said, tells it in such a conversational way. And I think it's different from other memoirs in the sense that he is basically telling his readers, like, these are some things that happened to me, whether they were like mistakes or good things, and I want you to learn from the things that I've done in my life, and is like addressing his readers. And I think that is just such an interesting and cool way to tell a story, because most memoirs are just kind of like, this is my life, take it for what it is. But he's kind of like, no, I want you to use things that I've done and learn from them. And so I just loved that. I loved how at the end, every chapter was basically kind of a different essay or, you know, anecdotal thing about his life, but it did go in like a very linear format. But every chapter kind of offered up some sort of like nugget of advice about life and, or, you know, love or grief or sex or, you know, and I just loved that he decided to tell his story that way. So in his memoir, he talks about things, like I said, grief, love, friendship, family, but also bigger topics, you know, like intersectionality, activism, being an advocate for yourself, educating yourself, just very, very important topics that teens need to hear about. And I loved that he told his story in such a candid way. He was very, very honest, especially in talking about sex and sexual relations. He does go into detail about, you know, the first time he had sex, and that I felt was so, so important because not enough talk is happening about how sex really works, especially when you're talking about teenagers, and especially when you're talking about homosexuality. I feel like teens that are not heterosexual need to hear stories from people that are not heterosexual and to kind of feel like they are being heard and recognized. And I just loved how, again, he told his story in a very relatable, down-to-earth way. There were times a lot of times that I was laughing. There were times that I wanted to cry. He just told his story in such a just amazing way. I just loved it. And so I highly, highly recommend this memoir to everybody, especially if you love memoirs. You should definitely check this one out. I listened to it on audio. I plan to get a physical copy, because I want a copy for my shelves. I definitely want to revisit this memoir in the future. And obviously also, can we just talk about the cover? This is one of the most beautiful covers, stunning covers I have seen all year. It is fabulous. So yes, definitely check out All Boys Aren't Blue. It was such a good read, and I can't wait to reread it someday. I mean, it was a 5-star read, obviously. All right, guys, so those are all the books that I read in the month of June. Overall, it was a pretty good reading month. I am pretty happy. It was very nonfiction heavy, which I'm not gonna complain about because obviously it was what I was in the mood for. So yeah, let me know down below what you read in the month of June, because I would love to hear what everybody was reading. And yeah, I can't wait to chat with you guys in the comments. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk with you soon.